No. So we're doing. So this is. I wish I could call it Chazara Shir. Obviously, it's not. But we're doing the area of the relationship between Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh. Okay.
I remember.
I missed
Okay.
a lot.
Yeah. Everyone. Right. That's why I'm doing it. I want to get on. So what I liked about this sugya a lot is I love when you can take a basic idea and then build on it step by step by step, and then come up with like a nice creative conclusion. I think this area personifies that. Okay. So I want you to. To me, one of the most important things about this area was just to follow. Again, obviously, it's my approach. Doesn't mean it's the right approach, but just show the approach I took and how I got to the conclusion I did. Okay. All right. So Sugi starts on Rosh Hashanah Lamed Hey and Aleph. Now that everyone knows the facts, we can go through this. Won't take that much time. So what does the Gemara say? So we know his background information. There's machlokas in the Gemara about whether a yachid can rely on the shliach tzibur to fulfill his obligation as Shemon Esrei. So in the old days, right? In the old days, no one had Sidurim, right? So that's true also. No one had Sidurim. So therefore, people didn't really know. If you didn't have a siddur, so what are you going to know? How are you going to know tefillah? You won't know it that well. So most people were not knowledgeable in tefillah. So there's a machlokas in the Gemara. Everyone agrees if a guy does not know the tefillah, regular Shemon Esrei, so he can rely on the shliach tzibur when it's time for him to repeat the Shemon Esrei, right? The question is, what if you do know Shemon Esrei? So there's machlokas. One side holds that even for the baki, even for the person who knows it, he can still rely on the shliach tzibur, and one says no. But the Gemara says when it comes to Rosh Hashanah Musaf, everyone agrees, right, that by Rosh Hashanah Musaf, you can rely on the shliach tzibur, all right? Okay. So before looking at the Gemara, we'll find out soon. But if you look at the Gemara, right? If you look at the Gemara, before you look at the Gemara, the question you have, if I ask you why is it that you would think that the average person can rely on the shliach tzibur to fulfill his obligation of the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, you say the reason why is because the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah is, review structurally, what makes the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah very unique is that, right, so the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah is different than Musaf Yom Kippur. Musaf Yom Kippur is a regular Musaf, right, with vidui attached to the end. Right? In fact, that's why you're able to, as I mentioned this morning, you're able to go into the personal there, but vidui is not part of Musaf. It's not part of Shemon Esrei. It's afterwards. You end your Shemon Esrei. You say, I'm Varach Etzmo Yisrael Shalom. For all sense of purposes, you are done with Shemon Esrei. So it's all added onto it. But what Rosh Hashanah, Musaf Rosh Hashanah is different. Musaf Rosh Hashanah is your regular Musaf, Ubnei Chate'enu, with Korbanos. And then what Chazal did is they kind of extended it. They created like this space. And they put in Machios, Zechonos, and Shofars. Right? So it's the longest Musaf. So that would be the logical reason why. And yet what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, Maishna, Hani, Ilim, Amishum, Dinfishi Krai. So maybe you'll say, this is the trick. What's the first answer the Gemara says? Why would you think that the Yachid can rely on the Shliach Tzibur to fulfill his obligation of Musaf Rosh Hashanah? Because of Psukim. Okay? Alright, now there are a lot of Psukim, a lot of verses in our Rosh Hashanah Musaf. Which verses are we talking about?
Yeah.
We know, for now, we do know, but for now we don't know. Okay? We're going to say for now, lots of Psukim. Lots of verses, okay? Because that's the problem. The problem is if you give it over, if you say first, if you say the Korbanos, everyone's like, well, what do you mean, are there many Korbanos? So that's why I just say Psukim in general, all right? It's a lot of Psukim. A person has to know, right? A lot of Psukim. So because of that, what's going to happen? He's going to make a mistake. Since he's going to make a mistake, so that's why you're allowed to rely on the Shliach Tzibur. So what's the Gemara's answer? So the answer is that the answer is that, and this is a strange answer. The Gemara says, "V'ha'amar Rav Chanan al-Marav kiman shamar v'sorsacha kasuv lemor shuv ein tzarich." Right. So as long as he says v'sorsacha kasuv lemor, right, which means what does he say? He gets up to he says the introductory paragraph that talks about how we don't have the Beis Hamikdash. He gets up to the part about the psukim, and what does he say?
The Torah says that.
The Torah says that. Right? What I said, the Torah says that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the Gemara says, since that's not the answer, the Gemara says, so therefore, Ella Mishum Da'avshe Brachos. And that's a simple pshat. There are more brachos in Musaf Rosh Hashanah than there are in any other tefillah. Where are those brachos? Well, okay. Every Shemon Esrei has how many brachos? Well, I should say that. Okay. What does every Shemon Esrei have in common? Everyone, including Musaf.
You have one bracha.
Shevach Hanodah. There's always 3 and 3. There's 3, right? Magen Avram, Chaim Mesim, Kel HaKadosh, / Mel HaKadosh, right? Tov Shimcha. Would say, Machazish Chanas L'Tzion, Tov Shimcha, and Avrech Zomay Sova Shalom. Every Shemon Esrei, Musaf, whatever you call it, has that in common. Question is the middle. So we have Shemon Esrei. Yeah. That's normal, right? Then there's Musaf, Normally, how many brachas does Musaf add? One, which is Kedushas HaYom, right? One bracha. What happens by Rosh Hashanah? 3. Right? So since you have 9 total brachos, 3 in the middle, and we know those 3 brachos are very long, right? Melech Halard, Zocher Ris, and whatever the shofar's one is. Okay? That's a lot of information a person knows. He's not going to remember. Okay? So again, why is it that the Yachid can rely on the Shliach Tzibor to fulfill his obligation of Tfilas Musaf and Rosh Hashanah? First, the Gemara says because he's going to mess up the Psukim. Right? The Gemara says 1 second. You don't have to worry about the Psukim, because what can you do? You can go ahead and use this nice method of circumvention. The Gemara concludes that no, it's because of the brachos. All right, so there's 2 questions we asked. Question number one was, what's this business of circumventing? And it's a funny thing. In other words, if you're telling me, if the chiyuv is to recite the Psukim, right, the verses, so what kind of thing is that that Chazal would set up an obligation and yet create a method of circumventing it? You understand? Okay.
Did anybody say a negative circumventing, or is it just not as tight as those duties?
No, one question we asked is how can Chazal set up a system of circumvention? The other question we asked is that it's funny what they're doing. They're looking at Musaf. When I look at Musaf, big word, as a homogeneous entity. Malchios is an entity. Zechronos is an entity. Shofars is an entity. Right?
Yeah.
What's the Gemara telling you? It's saying there's 2 parts. There's Psukim and there's Tefillah. Why would they do that? I wouldn't look at Musaf that way. I mean, just intuitively, I wouldn't see it as 2 components. I'd see it as an entity. Okay. So again, the question is why? What's the Gemara doing by showing us by doing that? So what do we say the answer was? Anyone remember?
Which answer?
To the Havmin. The Havmin and Maskana. I think we start with the Maskana first. All right. In this case, we'll start with the Maskana and we'll work backwards. Okay. So normally, if I told, what's the obligation of reciting Psukim for Kriya Shema? What's that obligation? By Kriya Shema, twice a day I must. What? I must what? Oh, so I must have Kabbalah Omer Shemayim, and all the other ideas in there, and that's emerged only by doing what? By reciting the actual text of Shema. If I get up to Shema and I say it was Rosacha Kosuv Lemor, have I fulfilled my obligation? Of course not, because I have to actually enunciate those ideas. And those are contained in Kriya Shema. But clearly that's not happening here. So that must tell you that what's the function of the Psukim in relation to the Tefillah? It's not an independent chiyuv, rather what are they doing?
Helping you do the chiyuv. It's the only way to do the chiyuv. It's the method.
Oh, but what's the relationship?
It's referencing.
What? Better than referencing. You're right, it is referencing, but better than that. Well, the word he was making fun of before. Buttressing. Or reinforcing, if you want that. And I think it's a nice idea because it shows you how the Tefillah was set up. So what is it? How is it reinforcing? Because what do you say in the Tefillah? So you say in the Tefillah, you make all these claims about God. You say God is A, B, C, D, E. You give Shevach, you give Hodah, Bakasha, all these great things. And after you're done with that, the Psukim come along and they say, oh, and we'll show you as an example. This is all the things we said about God. Okay. In other words, the proofs of that which you said about God are found in the Torah, in Tanakh. Okay.
Definitely does not believe it.
The expression.
Well, no, the proofs that this is what Torah says.
Fine.
The proofs that that's what Torah said.
That's what we mean. I don't mean. For instance, we talk about God's being a zocher, that God remembers everything. Okay, He's a zocher everything, right? Okay. So what's the example that we give? He remembered Noah. He remembered Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim. So we look at those examples, those expressions of God's zechira in Torah. Okay. So, but what was the Havmina? The Havmina is that it's true. The Havmina knows that they function in a secondary way, but that's why you could circumvent them. But why would you be concerned that you might make a mistake in the Psukim? What makes the Psukim different than the Tefillah? On a functional level, one's secondary to the other. But insofar as the content is concerned, what? It's a pasuk, right? And if you're going to make a mistake, better to make a mistake in the words of Chazal than the words from HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
It's not a likely mistake, it's the mistake itself.
Bingo. So since the mistake is in the content, that's why the Gemara first goes with the Psukim. And that's why, but then the Gemara says, but functionally, the Psukim are secondary to the Tefillah. Content is more important, functionally is secondary. So that's why you can circumvent it. You know what I mean?
Both Psukim though?
Say again?
Aren't both parts Psukim?
What's both parts?
Melchus, Shofar,
No, it's Tefillah. It may have a pasuk in it, but it's Tefillah, Psukim, Tefillah.
And there's a lot of Psukim.
Where?
Melchus, and Shofar.
In which part?
In the middle.
In the psukim part, or in the the psukim?
In each one,
Those are the psukim.
Right.
That's what so what's your question?
So are you going to make a mistake in those also?
Includes it applies to the tefillah. Okay, so that's part one. Okay. Now comes the next question, which is
The Musaf part is the butcher.
but so that's like the introductory move. Okay, so now comes the difficult part. Okay, so which psukim are we talking about? And this is I'm trying to. So at this point, all right, this is the issue, the real issue. Okay, is we're going to deal with the psukim. Okay, and what's fascinating about this is that there's a big machlokus about the half meaning. Right, so let's talk about the psukim for a second. Which psukim are we talking about? All right, so logically, right, you'd have to say which psukim should we be talking about. If you're going to say that people are going to make a mistake in length of verses, where would it make more sense to apply to? The Korbanos ones or the Malchus and Shofars? What? Well, okay, the statistical chances of you making a mistake is going to go higher if you have more psukim, correct?
Maybe a mistake by Kavanas is worse.
Why would it be worse?
Because the act of saying the Kavanas is the act of bringing them.
Right, but the only problem is, fine. Okay, it could be. I'm just saying that in general, intuitively it would say length, okay? Rashi's very cagey. What does Rashi first say? Rashi says that, it's unclear. EY. It's unclear what he wants to say first. Because he says, the Nefishi cried, the Ika Musfe, the Musfe Rosh HaShana V'Rosh Chodesh, Umachel Zechron Shofar. So he says, which psukim are you talking about? All the psukim. And then Rashi goes back on himself and says, no. He says, maybe you'll think it's the Korbanos. Right? Maybe you'll think it's the Korbanos. What does Tosfos have to say about that? Again, Rashi's saying, what was the Gemara's assumption? Where are people going to make a mistake? They're going to make a mistake in what? Of Korbanos. Even though there's only 6, whatever, 4, 5, whatever it is. Where's the mistake going to emerge? It's going to emerge in the Korbanos. All right? Tosfos flips out on Rashi. Why? Tosfos says that can't be. All right? Because Tosfos says in Ilema, he says, Aval mikro shel musaf sarech lahazkir laolam shehem makam Korbanos. Okay, so Tosfos says that the psukim of musaf you're obligated to say. Meaning, on Shabbos, okay? What do we say on Shabbos? We say, Tikanta Shabbos, and after that, what do we say? That's actually right? So Tosfos would say, if I didn't say, have I done my musaf? What makes a musaf a musaf? The psukim, right? The saying the psukim, right? So therefore, Rashi could never have meant that a person would make a mistake. Rashi would never say that the Gemara was assuming that a person is going to make a mistake in the psukim the Korbanos and then offer a method of circumventing, because you can never circumvent
that which can't be circumvented.
That which cannot be circumvented, i.e. the psukim of Musaf.
The Iker.
Okay, the psukim of Musaf. All right, so again, clear? So what Tosfos' position is what? Tosfos' position is that when it comes to the psukim of Musaf, what? When it comes to the psukim of Musaf, Tosfos holds
it cannot be circumvented.
Meaning, I have to say the psukim for every. So every time I have a Musaf, Yantav, Shabbos, Rosh HaShana, Yom Kippur, come into this part of the psukim, you must recite them. If you don't, you're out. Okay?
You're
out. And then comes the Ramban. What does the Ramban say?
Oh, of course you can't be this, because you don't need to say the psukim.
Right. Umi Hizkir. B'musav sheyazkir psukim klal. Afilu chatchila. And the musav yom ploni zeh nasel fanecha. Right? So the Ramban says the exact opposite. Right? The Ramban says whoever said that you're obligated, you're chayv to say the psukim of musaf. It's the opposite. You never have to say the psukim of musaf. This is called svaros afukos, meaning you have two positions that are extremes of each other. One guy says you have to do it. The other guy says you know how to do it. This is very difficult. Okay? Not bad.
Which one's right?
What?
Which one's right?
Well, there's no right.
There's one.
Tosfos is saying that when it comes to Musaf, you must say the psukim. Ramban's saying the opposite. He's saying you don't have to say the psukim. What kind of machlokas is that? Yeah. What is this? Ramban said there's two ways. It's amazing machlokas, I think. There's two ways you could see how Chazal set up Musaf. Okay. One possibility is like this. The Beis HaMikdash gets. One possibility is like this. No, I know what to do that. Okay. That's when I say there's two. One possibility is when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Okay, so now we no longer have, we don't have any korbanos, we no longer have musafin, right? So Ramban held, Chazal added another tefillah called musaf, right? And the objective of the tefillah, right, is to reference back to the fact that we don't have musafin, the institution of musafin. We don't have that anymore. And that's reflected in the tefillah. What do we say in the tefillah? The first part. All those things are references to the fact that we no longer have the Beis HaMikdash. So the objective of Musaf, according to Ramban, it was set up for the purpose of referencing back to the fact we no longer have Musafim. No, it's not Tosos. That's Ramban. That's Ramban. Tosos is saying no. Tosos is saying that during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, each Kedushas HaYom, every special day of the year, produces an obligation to bring a korban. Right? That's naturally part of the day. So what did Chazal do? They came along and said, okay, well, just because the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed doesn't mean the I think that's a great move. Doesn't mean the Mechayev falls away. You can express that chiyuv in another way. The reciting the psukim. Right? Because when you recite the psukim, what are you doing? It's as close as possible to doing the korban.
That means you don't have the most secure.
So now why is Tosos then so problematic? Okay, what's the problem with Tosos? This next line. Where Tosos says, this is it. Aval. Well, Ramban has to deal with this issue. Ramban doesn't have to deal with this at all. Tosos says, Aval. What does Tosos say? Aval Musaf de Rosh Chodesh ain't tzarich la'azkir Rosh Hashanah. Ela shedailo b'masha amar milavad olos hachodesh minchasa shebezen nichal kol musaf Rosh Chodesh. Okay. What does that mean? Okay. So take a look at the last page of these sheets. Okay. All right.
What would you
in the what? What does it say in the Torah? So the Torah in Parshas Pinchas, I know everyone loves that parsha because all it does is list korbanos, right? It actually counts Bnei Yisrael for the second time. Mucho exciting. There's a little bit in the middle of Bnei Sofchad, and then right back to korbanos. Right, a lot of korbanos. Okay, so in Parachav Ches, the list of korbanos of Rosh Hashanah. Every musaf that was brought always had a seir. Okay, seir is also a code word for a chatas. Okay, both on Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah. So on Rosh Chodesh, a chatas was brought, and on Rosh Hashanah, a chatas was brought. Now, what day on Rosh Hashanah? You have two holidays on Rosh Hashanah. You have Rosh Hashanah and you have Rosh Chodesh. Everyone aware of that?
Yes.
Correct? Why does it have to be the case?
It's the first day of the month.
Thank you. I'm not trying to treat you guys like idiots, but yes, on Rosh Hashanah, which is Aleph Tishrei, two things happen. It's the first day of the month of Tishrei, and it's the first day of the year. We just said the month of the year.
Second day is Rosh
Okay.
Chodesh.
So therefore, naturally, what?
Second day is Rosh Chodesh, though.
Well, I was at the end of Shir yesterday.
I'm saying, so did they do on the second day Rosh Hashanah?
They would not bring a korban musaf for. Okay. So what is that? Why am I bringing up that point? Because both sets of korbanos are brought on on Aleph Tishrei. You brought korbanos of Rosh Hashanah and you brought korbanos of Rosh Chodesh. Both were brought.
Right.
Okay. Now, when the Torah lists the korbanos of Rosh Hashanah, what does it say? Milvad. Uminchasa. What does milvad mean?
Aside for.
No. Not if except for, then you have a problem. That's exclusive. Aside from. Right? No, you understand there's a big difference between the two. Okay? So the Torah tells you that, and if you're reading the Torah, what are you going to think? God wants to conserve space in the Torah. So rather than list all the korbanos of Rosh Chodesh, He's telling you, by the way, on Rosh Hashanah, you bring all those korbanos I talked about in Rosh Chodesh. So reference back to except for the chatas, because it says milavad.
Olas.
Say it louder.
Olas.
Olas hachodesh minchasa, which excludes what? That's like a Mexican joke. It excludes what? So Tosos. So what does Tosos say? Tosos says something very bizarre, and this is what I love about Tosos. Tosos' svara is that you must recite the psukim because you must recite the specific korbanos brought on that day. Yet for some reason in Rosh Hashanah, even though he knows darn well that the korbanos of Rosh Chodesh are brought, nonetheless, what does he say? You can say just by saying milvad is sufficient. But since milvad doesn't include the seir, you say shnei seirim kilchasam. Because what does shnei seirim kilchasam mean? Well, no.
Wait, no, it just means
Shnei Seirim, because one seir was brought on for Rosh Hashanah, the other one's brought Rosh Chodesh. So by saying Shnei Seirim, you're saying now I reference all those korbanos. That's Tosos' Soser himself, or I should say Soser. He's not consistent. Don't you guys all love consistency, right? Tosos can't. Consistent about that. Tosos said, okay. Tosos says that you must say all the psukim for every musaf to be yotzei, except for what? So except for what? Except for Rosh Chodesh. For some reason, on Rosh Hashanah, even though it is Rosh Chodesh, you don't have to say Elul Psukim.
Oh,
What kind of thing is that? How can you say that? Okay, how can you say that? How can you say that? Okay.
This is how we plunged into the whole thing with Rosh Chodesh not being a thing.
Yeah, we're about to make the plunge. Okay, so in order to answer that, let's.
Toast is and toast.
The Gemara says, "Ma'ol haskil shel Rosh Chodesh Rosh Hashanah." So a lot of Gemaras are like that. There's Gemaras in Shabbos that had that by Chanukah and Al Nisim and other situations. When the Gemara says "Ma'ol haskir," what does it mean? It means doesn't know. There's two logical possibilities. Okay, so the Gemara's question is, what do we do about saying Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah? Okay, what do we do about that? Do we say since they're Chalukim Musafin? What does Chalukim Musafin mean?
Separate Musaf.
So therefore, what? How should that be reflected? There's separate korbanos brought for each day on Rosh Hashanah. So when you say the S, you'd say as Yom HaZikaron Hazeh, and you'd say as Yom Rosh Chodesh Hazeh. You'd say both. You'd say it's Rosh Hashanah today and it's Rosh Chodesh today, right? Why would you say that? Because you bring both korbanos. Or do you say no? You say Zikaron. Why? Zikaron Echan Ola Lakan Lakan. What does that mean? There's something called Zikaron, and both Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh share that in common. Because it says by Rosh Hashanah it's Zikaron Shura. And what does it say by Rosh Chodesh?
One Zikaron covers both.
What?
One Zikaron covers both.
That's what it sounds like.
Can't see that.
Yeah, Vayulacham Zikaron. There's one idea of Zikaron. Okay? So the Gemara doesn't answer it. The Gemara goes, it keeps it as two possibilities. But one thing we know from this Gemara, okay, what do we know from this Gemara? All right? That's why I'm doing this on the fast day. What do we know from this Gemara? What we know from this Gemara is that Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh share some core idea. I don't want to get into that. You can speculate up the wazoo. But they share a core idea, but yet they're still able to maintain independent expressions of Kedusha. It's a very funny day. Because what should happen? When Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah come together, they should become one thing. They should unite, right? Like, an example I use is like when you graft, I know we don't do this today, but when you graft, let's say, it's not a tangent. I take half, so to speak, half an orange and half a grapefruit and I put them together, what's supposed to happen? They become a pamela or some other entity. What it's saying here is that Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh, when they joined together, they didn't fuse.
But that never happens with this Chodesh.
What?
That never happens with this Chodesh when it...
So normally, whenever you have two Kedushas Yoms come together, they coexist. They don't fuse. But here there is a fusion. Why? Because it's Zikaron. Zikaron means there's a fusion. Okay? The problem in Tosos is that Tosos hold that you must recite the Psukim of the specific day. Yet for some reason, in Rosh Hashanah, he says you don't have to actually say the Psukim of Rosh Chodesh. Why not? Okay. And then we saw from the Gemara in Eruvin that there's an idea of Zikaron. The Gemara has a tension. Do we say that Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah share some sort of thematic unity? So they're not like Rosh Chodesh coming up on Shabbos. They have nothing in common. But yet, rather than have them fused together, they maintain separate musafim, separate kedushas that are expressed. So what kind of thing is that? So to answer that, you got to do the Tosos on Chesam Beis in Rosh Hashanah, based on the idea of Tiku b'Chodesh Shofar b'Kesel Yom Chagenu. So there's an idea that Rosh Hashanah eclipses or covers Rosh Chodesh. What does that mean? So I'm going to do it outside to make it easy for you guys. So Rabbeinu Meshulam says what it means is like this, and this is important. You got to follow this. He says the Torah says Milavad Olas HaChodesh Minchasa, right? It's not mentioning the Chatas. So what would you have thought? But when they brought the Korban Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah in the Beis HaMikdash, what would be missing from that Korban? The Chatas. Okay, so Rabbeinu Meshulam's first possibility is that they actually brought the Korban Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah without the Chatas. So Tosa says that's impossible, factually. It's impossible to say that factually, okay? Because there's a Tosefta that openly says there were 12 Seirei Rosh Chodesh. What? Okay. So Rabbeinu Meshulam says, no, I didn't mean to say that, right? Just read his Lashon. I didn't mean to say that. Rather, he says, Shalo Amar She'ein Bo Musaf Ela Miskase Shalo Hizkir Hacha Chatas Bikra De Milvad Kemoshe Hizkir Ola. What does Miskase mean? What does it mean that he eclipses it? That God kept out the Chatas when he says Milvad, just Milvad Olas, and kind of ignored the Chatas. So what kind of answer is that? Well, how does that make any sense? And then Tosos ignores Rabbeinu Meshulam and says, no, you still say Shnei Seirim. Okay? So again, just let's review everything. Rashi holds on Rosh Hashanah, you see the Pesukim of Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh. Okay? Rabbeinu Meshulam holds, you say Milavad, you don't mention any reference to the Seir that was brought on Rosh Chodesh. Okay? and that fulfills miskaseh. Rabbeinu Tam says you say milavad and shtei seirim, but you don't say the psukim of Rosh Chodesh. What are they arguing about? Shita. Well, okay. Well, let's just get rid of Rashi first. Rashi's easy because Rashi holds. What's the nature of the existence of Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah? What are they? Like every other, right? Like any other two kedushas that come together. This is no different than Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos Yom Tov, Shabbos Yom Kippur. There's no difference conceptually between the relationship between these two and any other 2 days of kedushas. Why did God set up that way initially? Whatever. That's a separate question. He doesn't care. Very simple. All right. Who do you want to do first from these two guys? Rabbeinu Tam or Rabbeinu Meshulam? Okay.
Wait, the Musaf for Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh is different.
Okay, Rabbeinu Meshulam. So he says there's an idea of miskasa. Okay, so you have to explain halachically, I think, and this is, my Chavrus and I came up with this, and it turns out the Rav has a very similar, if not exactly the same, but very similar approach. You have to understand, how's miskasa expressed? Or is he saying, he doesn't, it can't be that you didn't bring, that if you brought a korban Rosh Chodesh, okay, on Rosh Chodesh, and it was missing a chatas, do you still have a korban Rosh Chodesh? How can you say that? Right? The korban, in order to be the korban, the musaf of Rosh Chodesh, let's say as an ingredient, 5 things you got to bring, hypothetically, right? If you bring 4 of the 5, you don't have the korban, so it can't mean that. So but then what does he mean? So I think he's well. You went over this, right? So I think he's talking about how you look at the Kedushas HaYom. The corner of Rabbeinu Meshulam, when he sees Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh, what does he actually say? What? Rosh Hashanah. Oh, will you wait for that part? Oh, whatever. Okay. He sees Rosh Hashanah. Okay, he sees Rosh Hashanah. This day, according to Rabbeinu Meshulam, the Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah. That's what it essentially is. But 1 second. What? Can't ignore Rosh Chodesh. God says Milavad Olas HaChodesh Min Chasa. Right? He says you have to bring the korbanos to Rosh Chodesh. So how does he answer that? This is the move. Again, the Kedushas HaYom according to Rabbeinu Meshulam is Rosh Hashanah. But you still bring the korbanos of Rosh Chodesh, right? You still do that. So, what?
It's part of the Yom.
What? The next step you would say is that it's built into the Kedusha of Rosh Hashanah, except for one problem. If that were the case, then how's miskasa expressed? That's the key. He wants an idea of miskasa means that. Hold on. Miskasa means that Rosh Hashanah is like the older brother to Rosh Chodesh. There's a dominance. Okay. Originally, how could the dominance be expressed originally?
By
Rosh Chodesh wouldn't have the same amount of korbanos, but that can't be. So how is it expressed? How did God express it? So here's what I want to say. Okay, what I want to say is that it's called Rosh Hashanah, right? And in the Kedushas HaYom Rosh Hashanah exists the obligation of bringing. Obviously, it's called Rosh Hashanah. That's a Kedushas HaYom. In Rosh Hashanah itself, you must bring Rosh Hashanah korbanos. Obviously, right? Okay, but as well, Rosh Hashanah produces the obligation to bring the korbanos of Rosh Chodesh on that day. Every day of the year, every Rosh Chodesh of the year, right? The day itself of Rosh Chodesh creates the obligation to bring those korbanos. But on Rosh Hashanah, the obligation comes from Rosh Hashanah. You understand? Okay. So the korbanos have to be the same. But that's why God said, Milavad Olas HaChodesh Min Chasa, and didn't say Chatas. He's not telling you don't bring the Chatas. He's telling you, when you look at, it makes sense if you look at the Psukim. When you look at the obligation to bring korbanos of Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, it doesn't come from Rosh Chodesh. It comes from Rosh Hashanah. He initially learned what? He initially said that you brought every korban you would bring for the korban musaf of Rosh Chodesh except for the chatas. So he says that can't be, right? Okay. But what was he trying to accomplish by saying that? He's going to say, how's miskasa expressed? It's expressed by the fact that the korban was different. It was minimal. It was minimized in reference to its normal state. Okay.
Still there.
It is. Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Chodesh is still there. It's the younger brother. It's like the I don't know if that's the best example. Like the junior partner. Okay, it's a partner, but it's a junior partner. You understand?
It sounds the way that at least it's going.
Because the Rosh Chodesh, in a sense, is dependent on Rosh Hashanah. It still is a kedusha. It still has a sanctity, but its sanctity is dependent on Rosh Hashanah. That's the miskasa. Rashi's easy because Rashi's just saying that what did God do? He just brought on this day. He brought 2 kedushas together, right? Just like Shabbos Yom Tov. What they're saying is that no, on Aleph Tishrei, God created something new, a new kind of day. Okay, because you have two normative Kedushas. You have Rosh HaShana and Rosh Chodesh. So God, in his laboratory, so to speak, wanted to create something new. So according to Rabbeinu Meshulam, what did he create? He created a day called Rosh Hashanah, but you can't just ignore Rosh Chodesh because it's 11 months of the year of Rosh Chodesh. So he's saying that in Rosh Hashanah itself, what's unique about it is that it produces the Mechayev of Rosh Chodesh. The Mechayev of Korbanos comes from Rosh Hashanah. Rabbeinu Tam, what does Rabbeinu Tam hold? He says you say Milvad and you say Shnei Seirim. What about a question before that you have to recite a Lo Psuka? So what he wanted to say is that Tosfos holds that again, what they share in common is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a new Yom on Rosh Hashanah. Rashi's saying that it's just 2 days that coexist. Tosfos and Rabbeinu Meshulam are both saying there's some sort of new Kedusha created. But Tosfos is saying what? Tosfos is saying that God created something called Yom HaZikaron, right? And that goes back to that Gemara in Eruvin, right? Zikaron, Olakan, Olakan. What I think that means is that there's one core idea they share in common. It's the Yom Zikaron. But it's not just a philosophical idea, it's a halachic idea. That Kadosh Baruch Hu created a day called Yom HaZikaron. And in fact, when you say Yalav Yalav, what do you say? It's Yom HaZikaron is that. As Yom HaZikaron is Yom Shra Mikra Kodesh. We say Yom HaZikaron. Well, what are we saying when we say Yom HaZikaron according to Tosfos? We're saying Yom HaZikaron, which has two components to it. It has Rosh Hashanah and it has Rosh Chodesh. So they're both, now here's the key thing, they're both equally expressed insofar as their Korbanos are concerned. But it shares one, but it's one Kedushas Yom. But then what question you have to ask? Why don't you say both sets of Psukim? So the answer is very simple. This is not a steer in Tosfos' position. It's a modification. Tosfos is going to say, yeah, you should enunciate the Psukim. Except for one problem. If you enunciate the Psukim of Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, what would you therefore think? No, that's not. Here's Hamiskasa. No, but here, no. There's different. There's a whole Bachok is what Miskasa is referring to. Is it astronomical? Is it philosophical? He doesn't hold the halacha Miskasa. Right? What you'd be Rashi. That's his problem. Tosfos is saying, why do you say Milvad and Shnei Seirim? Because the specificity of the day requires you to enunciate the Korbanos, you have to reference Rosh Chodesh. But if you outright reference Rosh Chodesh, then what you're really saying, what's a person going to think?
2 separate days.
They're 2 separate days. They're not going to see that the Yom HaZikaron.
But then you also say that every Rosh Chodesh is